The Marquis Saint-Yves d'Alvedra, in his book The Archimetra, the solar alphabet consists of the 22 letters taking 7 characters Vatin, plus the 3 letters extracted, A, S, Th, and the sacredness of Aum. All of them are governed by rule him arithmetologica and also have a numeric value and musical cosmological configured in arrays or tables, as defined by Saint-Yves. The solar alphabet of 22 letters can be divided into 2 groups of 11 letters, 7 characters Vatin, plus the 3 letters extracted, which in turn have 20 other reflected letters forming a total of 44 precise characters. But let the Saint-Yves d'Alvedra himself who speaks to us of Vatin, the Brahmins call this alphabet Vatin, and it seems to go back to the first human race, then, by their 5 forms mothers rigorously geometric, himself, Adam, Eve, and Adamah is signed. Moses seems to designate in verse 19 of chapter 2 of his Sefer Bereshith. Moreover, this alphabet is written from the bottom up, and their letters are grouped so as to form morphological images or speakers. The Pandits erase these characters on the blackboard, when the Guru's lesson is over. What also written from left to right as Sanskrit, and therefore European. Saint-Yves d'Alvedra, the Archimetra al Brahmatma belongs to the fullness of the 2 priestly and royal powers. These 2 powers are distinguished after to manifest, and the Mahatma represents more particularly the priestly power, while the Mahanga represents the real power. This distinction corresponds to that of the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. But otherwise, being beyond caste, the Mahatma and Mahanga have in themselves, much as Brahmatma, 1 character at a time priestly and real. We have alluded above to the kings of the Gospel, uniting them as the 2 powers. These mysterious characters actually represent the 3 heads of Agartha. Saint-Yves says well that the 3 wise men had come from Agartha, but without providing any details in this respect. The names that are ordinarily devolving certainly fanciful, except, however, of Melchior, in Hebrew King of Light, which is quite significative. El Mahanga offers Christ gold and greets him as Ray, the Mahatma offers incense and greets him as priest, and finally, the Brahmatma offers myrrh, the balm of incorruptibility, image Amrita, and greets him as prophet or spiritual master par excellence. The Amrita of the Hindus or ambrosia of the Greeks, 2 etymologically identical words, or food concoction of immortality, was also figured specifically for the Soma Vedic or Hauma Mazdeen. Incorruptibles resins trees play an important role in the symbolism. In particular, they are sometimes taken as emblems of Christ. The homage thus rendered to rising Christ, in the 3 worlds which are their respective domains, the authentic representatives of the primordial tradition, while the garment of perfect orthodoxy Christianity regarding this. Naturally, Ossendowski could not contemplate considerations of this order, but if she understood some things more deeply than the understood, he would have been able to observe the strict analogy between the supreme ternary Agartha and the Lamaism as follows: the Dalai Lama, making the holiness, or pure spirituality, of Buddha, the Tashi Lama, who takes his science, not magic as the author seems to believe, but rather theurgical, and the Bogdo, Khan, which represents its material strength and warrior, is exactly the same distribution as the 3 worlds. And could have even make this observation much more easily, as he himself had stated that the capital of Agardi reminds Lhasa, where the palace of the Dalai Lama, the Potala, is on top of a mountain covered with temples and monasteries. Moreover, this way of expressing things is wrong because it reverses the relationship, because in reality, it is the image that can be said reminiscent of the prototype, and not otherwise. Now the center of Lamaism cannot be more than an image of the true center of the world. But all centers of this kind have, as to the places where they are established, certain common landscape features, since these characteristics, far from being indifferent, have an undeniable symbolic value and also must be in relation to laws which act as the spiritual influences. That is a question which itself depends on traditional science that can give the name of sacred geography. There is another no less remarkable concordance, St. Yves, describing the various degrees or circles of initiatory hierarchy, which are related to some symbolic numbers, which refer specifically to the divisions of time. He ends by saying that the circle more higher and closer to the mysterious center consists of 12 members, representing the supreme initiation and correspond, among other things, to the zone sign. Now this constitution is reproduced in what is called the Circular Council of the Dalai Lama, consisting of 12 large Nams Hans, or Nome Khans, and also finds, moreover, even in some Western traditions, specifically those concerning the Knights of the Round Table. Also add that the 12 members of the inner circle of Agartha, from the point of view of the cosmic order, not simply represent the 12 zodiac signs, but also to the 12 Adityas, which are so many forms of the sun in relation to those same zodiacal signs. The name Aditya means the descendants of Aditi in the Rigvedan names, 6 of them cited: Mitra, Aryaman, Bhaga, Varuna, Daksha, and Amsa. And of course, like Manu Vaivaswata is called son of the sun, the king of the world also has the sun among its emblems. It is said that the Adityas, coming out of Aditi or indivisible, were first 7 before being 12, and that his boss was then Varuna. The 12 Adityas are Datri, Mitra, Aryaman, Rudra, Varuna, Surya, Bhaga, Vivaswat, Pushan, Savitri, Twashtri, and Vishnu. They are all manifestations of a single and indivisible essence, and it is also said that these 12 suns will appear all simultaneously at the end of the cycle, then entering the primary and essential unity of their common nature. In Gracia, the 12 great Olympians are also in correspondence with the 12 signs of the zodiac. The symbol alluded to that is exactly what the Catholic liturgy attributed to Christ when he applies the title Sun Justicii. The Word is indeed the spiritual sun, i.e., the true center of the world. And besides, this expression of Sol Justicii refers directly to the attributes of Melchizedek. It should also be noted that the lion, solar animal, is, in ancient times and the Middle Ages, an emblem of justice while power. The sign of the lion, Leo, is in the zodiac, the home of the sun. The sun of 12 rays can be considered as representing the 12 Adityas. From another point of view, if the sun represents Christ, the 12 rays they are the 12 apostles. The word apostolos means sent, and the 12 rays are also sent by the sun. Otherwise, you can see the number of the 12 apostles a mark, among many others, the perfect conformity of Christianity with the primordial tradition. The first conclusion that emerges from all this is that there really well close ties between the descriptions refer to more or less hidden, or at least not easily accessible spiritual centers. The only plausible explanation that can be given of this is that if these descriptions refer to different centers, these centers are not so say more than emanations of a single and supreme center. Since alluded to the Knights of the Round Table, we should point out here what the quest for the Grail, which, in the legends of Celtic origin, is presented as its primary function. In all traditions, reference is made to something that, from a certain time, would have been lost or hidden, would be, is, for example, the Soma of the Hindus or Hauma of the Persians, the potion of immortality which precisely has a very direct relationship with the Grail, since this is, it is said, the sacred vessel that held the blood of Christ, which is also the concoction of immortality. Moreover, the symbolism is different. Thus, among the Jews, is the pronunciation of the great divine name. But the basic idea is always the same. Also we remember, in this regard, the missing word of Freemasonry, which also symbolizes the secrets of true initiation. Thus, the search for the lost word is nothing more than another form of the quest for the Grail. This justifies the relationship indicated by the historian Henri Martin between Maçonnerie du Saint Grail and Freemasonry. And there is a very close connection between the symbolism itself, the Grail, and common center of all initiatory organizations. The Holy Grail is said to be the cup that was used in the sacrament, and where Joseph of Arimathea then collected blood and water escaping from the gaping wound in Christ's side by the spear of the centurion Longinus. This name Longinus is related to the same name of the spear, in Greek Ilogka, pronounced Lonki, Latin lanza is otherwise the same root. According to legend, this cup would have been transported to Britain by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. These two characters represent the real power and the priesthood power here respectively. The same with Arthur and Merlin in the institution of the Round Table. And it is necessary to see in it the indication of a link established between the Celtic tradition and Christianity. The cup indeed plays a very important role in most ancient traditions, and certainly this was the case particularly with the Celts. Note that it is often associated with the lance, and that these two symbols are then somewhat complementary to each other. The symbolism of the spear is often in relation to the world axis. In this regard, blood-dripping spear has the same meaning as the dew that emanates from a tree of life. Moreover, it is known that all traditions are unanimous in affirming that the vital principle is closely linked to the blood. This shows perhaps more clearly the essential meaning of the Grail is what is said about its origin. This cup have been carved by the angels in a fall emerald Lucifer's forehead at the time of his fall. Some say a drop emerald crown of Lucifer. But in that there is a confusion that comes from Lucifer, before his fall, was the angel of the crown, i.e., of Kether, the first Sephirah, in Hebrew Hakathriel, a name that is otherwise as number the 666 famous Apocalypse. This emerald reminds of a very striking in the way urn, the front pearl in the Indian symbolism, of which happen to Buddhism, often takes the place of the third eye of Shiva, which represents what can be called the sense of eternity. Moreover, it is said that the Grail was entrusted to Adam in the earthly paradise, but in his fall, Adam lost what in turn, as he could not take with him when he was cast out of Eden. The man departed from its original center was locked since then in the temporal sphere and could not find the only point where all things are contemplated under the aspect of eternity. In other words, the possession of the sense of eternity is linked to what all traditions call the primordial state, whose restoration is the first stage of true initiation, since it is the precondition of effective conquest of states superhuman. Moreover, the earthly paradise itself represents the center of the world, represented by the original sense of the word paradise. What follows may seem more enigmatic. Seth could enter the earthly paradise and recover the precious vase. Seth, or Set, deity of brute force, of the tumultuous, the uncontainable. Lord of what is not good and darkness, god of drought and desert in Egyptian mythology. Seth was the patron deity of storms, war and violence. It was also patron of the production of the oases, Dynasty 19. Now the name Seth expresses the ideas of foundation and stability, and therefore, indicates to some extent the restoration of primordial order destroyed by the fall of man. It is said that Seth remained 40 years in the earthly paradise. The number 40 also has a sense of reconciliation or return to the beginning. Periods measured by this issue are very often in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Recall the 40 days of the flood, the 40 years during which the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, 40 days Moses spent on Mount Sinai, the 40-day fast of Christ. Lent naturally has the same meaning. Thus, it should be understood that Seth, and those after him possessed the Grail, could establish a spiritual center to replace the lost paradise, which was like a picture of it. And then, this possession of the Grail represents integral preservation of the primordial tradition in a spiritual center. Moreover, the legend does not say where or by whom the Grail was preserved until the time of Christ. But the Celtic origin that is recognized should imply no doubt that the Druids had a part in it and to be counted among regular conservatives' primordial tradition. The loss of the Grail, or any of its symbolic equivalents, is the loss of tradition with all that it entails. Moreover, this tradition cannot be lost but for some secondary centers when they cease to be in direct relationship with the supreme center. As for the latter, always keeps intact the deposit of tradition, and is not affected by changes that occur in the outside world. So much so that, according to various fathers of the Church, particularly Saint Augustine, the flood has failed to achieve the earthly paradise, which is the Room Hainach and the land of saints, and whose summit touches the lunar sphere. That is, it is in the communication point of earth and heaven. According to Genesis, and Enoch walked with God, and no longer appeared more, in the visible or the outside world, because God took him. It would have been then transported to the earthly paradise. This is consistent with the symbolism employed by Dante, who places the earthly paradise at the top of the mountain of purgatory, which is identified as the polar mountain of all traditions. But just as the earthly paradise has become inaccessible, the supreme center cannot be expressed outwardly. And then we can say that the tradition is lost for the whole of humanity, and that is not conserved more than in some rigorously closed centers. And the mass of men no longer involved in it in a conscious and effective, contrary to what had taken place in the original state. So, Hindu tradition teaches that there was at the origin but one caste, which was called Hamsa. That means that all men then possess the spiritual degree which is designated by this name, and that is beyond the distinction of the four current castes. Such is the condition of the present epoch. The beginning, moreover, goes back far beyond what is accessible to ordinary history. Thus, the loss of tradition, as the case may be understood in this general sense, or it may refer to the darkening of the spiritual center that ruled more or less invisibly destinations of a particular people or a particular civilization. The primordial state and primordial tradition refers the double meaning which is inherent in the word grail itself, as the grail is both a glass, grassail, and a book, gradle or gradual. And the latter clearly refers to the tradition, while the other relates more directly to the state itself. In some versions of the legend of the Holy Grail, the two senses are closely linked, since the book then becomes an inscription traced by Christ or an angel on the cup itself. It would in that approach with the Book of Life and with some elements of apocalyptic symbolism. It is not aim of this article into the secondary details of the legend of the Holy Grail, but all also have a symbolic value, or follow the story of the Knights of the Round Table and his exploits. Mention only the Round Table, built by King Arthur based on the plans of Merlin, was destined to receive the Grail when one of his knights had come to conquer and would have led Britain to Armorica. The name Arturo has a remarkable sense, which is linked to the symbolism polar. This table is also a very ancient symbol, truly, one of those who were always associated with the idea of spiritual centers, conservative tradition. Moreover, The circular shape of the table is formally linked to the zodiacal cycle by the presence around it of 12 main characters, feature that is in the constitution of all the centers in question. The Knights of the Round Table are sometimes at number 50, which was, for the Jews, the number of Jubilee, and also refers to the kingdom of the Holy Spirit. But even then, there was always 12 who played a leading role. Also recall, in this way, the 12 peers of Charlemagne in other legendary tales of the Middle Ages, or the 12 main gods of different mythologies, as the Sumerian